Immediately after the funeral of my mother-in-law, Maria, whom I loved like my own mother, I received a letter from her. The lawyer, Cale, delivered the letter to my house. My name is Alice. I'm 43 years old. The letter began with the sentence, "The fact that this letter has reached you means that I am probably already gone from this world, and I am afraid you are crying." Tears slowly welled up at the sight of Maria's familiar handwriting. Originally, my father-in-law John died young, long before my husband Zach and I got married, and my in-laws apparently have no close relatives, and we have almost no extended family. Zach and I were not blessed with children, so Maria, Zach, and I lived modestly but happily together. Maria and I were especially close to the extent that Zach would say to me, "It's as if you two are real parents, and I am your son-in-law."
It's as if you two are real parents, and I am your son-in-law.
After Zach passed away from cancer last year, Maria and I were left alone, and then Maria was suddenly killed in a car accident and never returned. The accident was inexplicable, and somehow Maria was hit by a car traveling from a driveway in another city that she should have had no connection to far away from ours when she collapsed. The police are investigating both the incident and the accident, but have not found the bag she was supposed to have. The police asked me a lot of questions about the situation, but I had no idea what was going on, and I was too shocked to respond properly. I can't get my feelings straight about my sudden separation from Maria. In Zach's case, he had a year to fight his illness, and we treated him as well as we could, and Maria was there, so we were both able to remember Zach to our heart's content. We had vowed that we would overcome our grief together and continue to live in harmony. It distracted me while I had things to do like funerals and government procedures, but when it was all over, I suddenly felt lonely. My family is also a cancer family, and my parents are already passed. I have an older brother, but he lives with his family in a distant countryside. Even if I want to talk to my friends from school after a long time, each of them is still in the middle of raising their children, so it is difficult to talk to them. As I was thinking about what to do now, I received a phone call from a man claiming to be a lawyer. From the tone of his voice, I would say that he was about the same age as Maria in his 40s. From the tone of his voice, I would say that he was about the same age as Maria in his 70s. He apologizes for the delay in noticing the news of Maria's passing, and says he wants to meet with me as soon as possible to give me something.
Is this a letter from Maria?
I had never heard that Maria had been in contact with a lawyer, and a letter from the deceased person didn't make sense to me. I thought it was some kind of scam, but then I decided to see my lawyer, Cale, in case it really was a letter from Maria. The letter said, "I know you are surprised by my sudden letter, but please listen. You are in danger. Please believe my words and escape now."
Does Mr. Cale know the contents of this, or are you suggesting that Maria was targeted by someone?
I asked Mr. Cale, who was sitting in front of me. The handwriting is certainly Maria's. It's a distinctive habit character, and I recognized it right away, but the content doesn't ring a bell at all. It was like a drama that unfolded so much that it seemed like a tacky surprise. Maria was killed in a car accident, but the driver of the car has already been caught. The driver testified that Maria was lying on the road, which delayed his discovery. Maria shows signs of having been beaten, and I have been told that this may have caused her to lose consciousness. If this letter is true, Maria has an idea of who was violated. Did Maria know she was going to be involved in the case? If so, why didn't Maria run away? I was on the verge of tears again. Mr. Cale calmly replied, "I have not seen the contents, but I think I can guess what it is about." A little annoyed at the roundabout way of putting it, I asked, "Well then, what is Mr. Cale hearing from Maria?"
Who is Steve?
Mr. Cale said that Zach has a brother who is 6 years older than him. I had not heard a word from Maria or Zach, nor had I seen any pictures at all. Mr. Cale takes out a file that looks like a document from a bag on the side of the table.
Miss Alice, did you know that half of the violent crimes in our country occur in the home? The irony is that in the very home that is supposed to be the most comforting and happy place, there is a tragic incident in which a loved one takes the life of another family member. The old photo he showed me showed 4 people.
a young man and woman who appeared to be parents, a boy and a baby. The young woman looks familiar to me, and I think it is Maria. I thought I didn't know the young man either, but he looks somewhat like Zach. The boy's face has the look of a young man, and for all intents and purposes, they are father and son. It must have been taken when they were going to the ocean to hang out with a big ship in the harbor in the background. Everyone had happy smiles on their faces. The boy with the float is Steve. After being told by Mr. Kale, I look at the boy, the brother of Zach, whom I do not know. This picture was very happy, but my heart ached, wondering what in the world had happened. I'm wondering, does being a defense attorney mean that Steve has some kind of case?
Was Steve the one who roughed up Maria this time as well?
It must have been at least 15 years before Zach and I got married, and more than 17 or 8 years, if I include the time we dated. Otherwise, it is strange that I know nothing about it.
Yes, it is strange that I know nothing about it. Steve became a recluse the summer after 1 grade of junior high, suffering from teasing, and 7 years later, he had an incident.
Steve was so pessimistic about his future that he tried to forcefully commit suicide with his family after becoming a recluse. Late at night on the day of the crime, he entered his parents' room with a knife and struggled with John, who was awakened by a noise. John was severely injured at the time, but managed to see Steve. The incident ended in an attempt. However, as John and Steve struggled, Zach, then 14 years old, heard Maria's screams and called the police. Police cars and ambulances rushed to the scene, and the quiet residential area was said to be temporarily disturbed. At the time, the terms shut-in and neat were becoming social issues, and newspapers and TV reported sensationalized stories such as a shut-in boy planning to forcibly commit suicide with his family. I thought I had heard this news somewhere before, but if it was about my husband's family or not, I had no idea. But I had no idea if it was about my husband and his family or not. Because similar news is often reported, the parties involved, however, do not. The Zach family could not stand the publicity and moved out several times, almost as if they were running away in the night. I don't know if it was due to the serious injury at the time or the stress that followed, but John died a few years later. Maria and Zach have changed their name to Maria's maiden name and are finally able to live a normal life here.
Both the perpetrator and the victim are family members, so there's nowhere for emotions to go in a case between family members. They can't hate or resent him to the fullest. It is confusing for any human being to suddenly find themselves in such a complicated position, and it is very harsh to live under the public eye, rumors, and bashing. I hope you can understand the feelings of the deceased who are unable to speak to Miss Alice.
He summarized, I am speechless because the incident was so fierce. I never thought about what happened to the family after the incident, but as long as they are alive, life goes on. For the in-laws, Steve must have been their own adorable child. Steve was smiling in the photo I was shown, much like Zach, but the button that had been misaligned could not be fixed, and the worst tragedy happened. After that, Steve was sentenced to prison, and will serve time.
I told you earlier that I was in charge of Steve's defense.
The same penalty applies for an attempt as for an attempt, but it can be life or imprisonment for not less than 5 years and not more than 20 years. I interrupted him because the conversation was about to get long.
At least 5 years? You don't mean Steve could be out of prison already?
Yes, actually he was released from prison about 2 years ago.
According to the lawyer, the prosecutor's office has a system for notifying victims and others. After the sentence is finalized, a request can be made to the prosecutor's office to be notified of when the perpetrator is scheduled to be released from prison at maturity, and of the fact that he or she will be released after he or she is actually released. Otherwise, Maria is Steve's biological mother. She was contacted about a place to return to after his release from prison. At that time, Zach's cancer had been discovered and he was fighting it, and Maria did not want to worry him, so she could not talk to Zach about it. And did not want to worry him, so she could not talk to him about it.
Steve told me at the time that the reason for the incident was because he was pessimistic about his future.
The lawyer was a little lost and told me, it seems he wanted money to play.
Steve, who has been a recluse for many years, began secretly using Maria's credit card to play pay-to-play games on the computer and buy whatever he wanted through online shopping, and was often angry by John.
The evening of the day of the crime, he also spent quite a bit of money to buy weapons for the game, and they took his computer away. Steve lied to his lawyer, and John, Maria, and Zach, who knew the truth, said nothing. Is it a family affair that they wanted Steve to reflect well and serve his sentence, but did not expose the inside story of how he was slandered after his release from prison? In fact, Maria had been going to visit Steve from time to time while he was in prison. But each time she comes back disappointed by the unchanging Steve, who is completely unrepentant. Maria was afraid to live with Steve again after his release from prison. Maria knew that Steve would come to me, who was left behind, to ask for money if her son or herself died, not to mention the risk of violence. Complicated paperwork increases as the scheduled release date nears. She also has to decide where he will live. Distressed, Maria decided to consult with a lawyer who knew her at the time and asked him to handle the procedures and other matters on her behalf.
2 years ago, how did Steve make a living?
I was told that Maria had rented an apartment through her lawyer to assist him. They had done their shopping online. She gave Steve her wardrobe savings, her retirement funds, and Zach, i.e. her own inheritance when her son died. Steve became a recluse again after his release and did not work. When Maria, through her lawyer, told him that she could not support him forever and that she wanted him to work on his own from now on, Steve firmly refused.
Is Mom not loving me? She's always doting on my brother. She's always taking care of my little brother.
Steve was in a panic. Mr. Kale said, Of course,
the accident could have been accidental, but the deceased was worried about what Steve might do. He even pestered me to send him some money.
Steve also took an aggressive tone toward Mr. Kale, apparently asking him in detail about Maria's income and the current lives of John and Zach. Fortunately, I don't think they know your address, but I was curious as to why Maria passed away so close to Steve's apartment. I quickly remembered that I hadn't found Maria's bag there. At that moment, a chime rang. The only visitor scheduled is a lawyer.
Excuse me.
I tell him and then head for the front door. I have a bad feeling about this. I checked through the peephole in the door and saw a man standing there who looked a lot like Zach. The bag Maria used before her death can be seen in his hand. I quietly backed away and walked back to the living room and approached Mr. Kale.
I think it's Steve. What should I do? He has Maria's bag.
Mr. Kale's voice rumbles with nervousness and his face tightens.
Contact the police now.
Maybe he meant to say call the police, but I was so upset that I ran out the back door and into the police station right there. I don't think so, but did Maria and Zach envision this situation in the future? Or did they unintentionally choose housing close to the police? I don't know anymore. Later, when Steve saw the police officers who came with me, he immediately tried to run away and was caught by the police officers and questioned. As my intuition told me, the man who looked a lot like my husband was Steve, that is, my brother-in-law. I had seen family photos of Steve when he was a child and thought of him as a child, but in reality he was a middle-aged man who looked unhealthy. The resemblance to Zach made me strangely angry.
This man has caused Maria and Zach a lot of pain. I'm just here to get my share. I know you have Mother's legacy, don't you? I heard my brother also passed away last year. Give me my inheritance.
My brother-in-law ignored the police officer's question and yelled at me. How dare you say that? I was very angry. I sympathize with the fact that when he was little, he was teased and had to stop going to school. But then his behavior is selfish, unforgivable. What I want to ask more than anything else is, you are holding Maria's bag in your hand. What did you do to Maria? Did you raise your hand to a frail woman?
You are holding Maria's bag in your hand. What did you do to Maria? Did you raise your hand to a frail woman? What did you do to Maria? Did you raise your hand to a frail woman?
At my words, the police officers also saw the bag my brother-in-law was carrying. In a panic, my brother-in-law tries to hide it, but it is too late. When one of the policemen reaches out, my brother-in-law tries to bite the policeman as well. He said, "Hey, this is my money.
Hey, this is my money. It can't be helped. My mom said this is the last time. She was being cocky, and I just hit her a few times to make her feel sorry for herself.
I am horrified by my brother-in-law's thoughts. He doesn't get the story at all, and he doesn't feel sorry for me. On the contrary, you're my brother's wife.
You're my brother's wife. My mom and brother are gone. You owe it to me to feed me.
Maria and Zach may have been afraid to tell me about my brother-in-law for fear of this happening. They thought that if I didn't know, I wouldn't have to get involved. Miss Alice has no such righteousness.
No, Alice has no such righteousness.
But I didn't think the law would work with this brother-in-law. My brother-in-law, after all, is an invincible person with nothing to lose. I guess Maria never wanted me to see him because he is such a person. I wonder how hard it has been for them. I haven't read the whole thing yet, but Maria left me a letter expressing her concern for me, knowing that her life was in danger.
I can't help but wonder how much you have hurt Maria and Zach. I will never allow it. You will be brought to justice.
Indeed, the direct cause was because she was run over by a car. Nevertheless, he left Maria unconscious on the roadway. He is not a person who should be left out in the open to the world. I vowed to myself that I would send him back to prison at any cost. Seeing me, Mr. Kale interjected,
I will help you.
Was taken straight to the police.
Identified the culprit as her brother-in-law, and he was sent to jail again.
I returned home with Mr. Kale and read the letter from Maria to the end. Full of love. Maria's letter apologizes to me and full of love. I couldn't stop crying, especially when I saw the end of the sentence. Life is still long. Alice should live more happily and freely.